Hello, my name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the world's top executives and management teams, helping them achieve bigger and more meaningful results than ever before. In this season, I'm speaking with C-suite leaders from around the globe to find out what the COVID-19 pandemic has taught them and what wisdom they have to share for other leaders. Welcome to Leadership Lessons for Challenging Times. In this episode, I speak with Simon Hill. Simon is the CEO of Wazoku, which is an innovation platform focusing on really releasing ideas and innovation across medium-sized and large companies. He's grown the business from nothing to a great place in the global marketplace. He's just acquired a US company right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So making bold business moves, even with limited visibility in the market. So in this conversation, which I hope you'll find really enjoyable, we talk about innovation and how that shifts, how that might change, the decisions that business owners need to take about risk on and risk off behavior, and understanding what the growth path as a leader needs to be, and also being very honest, right, about how do you navigate when you're not quite sure. We also touch on scaling yourself. How do we actually take our own magic as a leader and replicate it into our organization to free ourselves up for the next level tasks? These are all super interesting and fascinating discussions, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as we dig in to get the inside story of leading in challenging times with Simon Hill. Hello, Simon.
Good morning.
Hey, great to have you here with me today. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
So, for the benefit of everybody else who doesn't know the legend that is Simon Hill, can you perhaps just tell us a little bit about you, just like the 2-minute elevator pitch, and also what's Wazoku?
Yeah, I'm still working on a legendary status, but thanks, Richard. So I'm Simon Hill. I'm the founder and CEO of Wazoku. We are an open innovation and idea management software and services business working with organizations from SMEs through to large multinational organizations and government institutions around the world, helping them through software and through stakeholder engagement to solve today's problems and create tomorrow's opportunities by the kind of process of challenge-driven innovation, ideation, brainstorming, crowdsourcing at scale, and then kind of delivering projects off the back of those that have really strong value for the organizations that we work with. At its heart, we help big businesses to solve problems more effectively than they do today.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is it's really helping large companies find the innovation and the ideas within their ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, look, we believe passionately that people are inherently creative and inherently problem solvers. We do it all the time in our private lives outside of work. In work, we've tended to stymie people into specific job roles and functions, and sort of, my goal is to try and unleash that creativity, give a voice to everybody in the process of bringing solutions, make work a bit more interesting for people that work there, make it a bit more accessible and engaging for the customers that buy from it, and help businesses to solve problems more effectively, right? There's no shortage of challenges, as we've seen for the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, perhaps you're out of business now because clearly in 2020 there are no more problems to be solved, right?
Exactly.
So clearly, I mean, I guess I've seen it in my own clients, right? There's a whole stack of issues that people weren't even thinking they were going to have to face 6 months ago. What are you seeing in terms of perhaps customer demand? Has that been shifting through the whole COVID pandemic? Or are people still addressing the same kind of main business challenges? Has that really changed the way people think about innovation?
I mean, I think that in these types of moments, right? And I've professionally now lived through 2 or maybe 3 of these, significant macro challenges, and I think you see organizations shift in a couple of directions, right? Either it's risk on or risk off.
Yeah.
And there's an abundance of new businesses that typically spawn out of circumstances like this, and and others have to bunker down and start thinking a little bit more short term. And so the pulse for me is that in terms of what we deliver, we've never been busier, right? I think that there's a utility in an asynchronous tool, right? One that doesn't need us to be on video conferences or kind of live with an audience, because as we've all learned for the past 3 months, that's really valuable, but also exhausting. Constantly being on live streamed web conferences and stuff. And so the ability to engage with your teams in an asynchronous fashion, or with your suppliers or with your customers in a world that doesn't need us to just be there immediately at that point in time, but to co-create and collaborate in a slightly different fashion, has actually become extremely valuable and powerful for people as we grow, right? And so that combined proposition, I've seen, we've never been busier. We've never, we had a brilliant quarter, but sitting at the start of that quarter with a board saying, which direction do we go, and what's the magic 8 ball telling us? And I checked on Amazon, they were all out of magic 8 balls. And so, I think that we were facing the same dilemmas that most CEOs and boards were facing: is do we go risk on or risk off? And we kind of kept our foot, maybe it was like this on the gas pedal, and we lifted it slightly, right. But in reality, we were still very much risk on from our business perspective. I think there's a very broad spectrum of that out there in the world at the moment.
Some companies have been hunkering down. Some companies have really been saying, let's kind of go big.
Yeah.
And what I loved, what you were saying there, was this point about nobody wants to be stuck on Zoom calls or team calls, for the whole day. And actually, what I'm seeing even with my own clients who are working on leadership retreats or strategy days, is that a lot of businesses actually have settled into a way of working where the default process is have a rambling conversation about something.
Yeah.
And that didn't really ever work before, but you could perhaps put up with having a rambling conversation for a day or for a morning or whatever in a room with your team. But when you're on a web conference, it's incredibly tiring and not that productive. And so I see that actually this virtual work actually increases the need for processes and for, as you say, it's some asynchronous work going through a system, a process to bring the creativity and innovation, because it doesn't necessarily happen on one of these calls, right? On one of these calls, you can do status reviews and updates and fairly transactional things. It can be harder, I think, to bring the innovation that I guess is the focus of what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I think there was this real spike where it was a very different way of working, and it worked for people, right? In some senses as a leader, I have the inverse problem of I'm trying to encourage people to take time off at the moment and not work quite so hard, because the division between work and life has become broken a little bit. But on the other hand, we opened our office up a couple of weeks ago for optionality, right? So people that didn't have the choice to go in. And I've been in for about half a day over that period. And you do notice the dynamic of being in the office just spawns very different ways of working. And you don't get that serendipity moment where you just need to get a question. You don't want to haul someone into an already busy conference call so it doesn't happen, and then you take it offline, and it just doesn't work as effectively in that very human way. I think we can provide some of that through the way that we work. The other thing is that as businesses have shifted, right? So if you've gone from risk on to risk off, or slightly less or more of the other, the ability to go back to the archive of the ideas that you said, look, these are not the ones we want to do now because we're in this mode, but we don't want to forget them, has also been really valuable. And I was talking to one of our clients from the NHS recently, and that's what she said. We've gone back to the archive to see, what do we have that are the quick win ideas now to help us to tackle the immediate challenges that we're facing, in this case as a health service, rather than potentially some of the kind of longer term projects that would have had impacts much further down the road. And so that ability to, as you change your cadence or your strategic priorities, kind of go back to the things that you've done, isn't that easy if you don't have a tool like ours, because where do your ideas live otherwise, right? How do you go remember where they all were? So so a lot of interesting shifts in the business environment, and I think they'll continue to happen, right? I think there's a lot more there's a lot more complexity to come. I actually think 2021 might be even more complicated than 2020 as a kind of spill out of this period of time, but we'll see.
So what's been the most difficult decision that you've had to make in this period as a CEO?
I mean, I think that, so we've been going through quite an interesting period as a business. You know, we were, as we came into it, we just started the process of acquiring a business in the US, right? That just happened a few days ago. And, you know, pursuing that in this environment was particularly risky, right? You know, it's not often that a UK business goes and buys a US company anyway. It's even less appealing when the pound's all over the show and getting worth less on the global stage anyway. So, you know, making the decision to push on, from my perspective, with a risk-on strategy there for something that we believe in the long term was a big challenge. It's not that we ever really thought not about doing it, but it certainly is it's a big risk-on move for us as an organization. And, you know, you don't really know how things are going to play out for the next 6, 9, or 12 months. I think that plus the, you know, as a software company, going 100% virtual was easy, but the human capital side of that shift is less easy. You know, we have a team of very varied experience, lots of people who, you know, we live in a city where real estate's extraordinarily expensive. Most people live in tiny little shoeboxes. They don't have the luxury of a home office and, you know, plenty of space to be able to get stuff done. And I think that side of things and the isolation, and people choose to live in an expensive city because it's got social and it's got entertainment and other things. You take that away and suddenly you've got a very expensive shoebox and no other real perks. I think that the human side and the mental side of that, after the initial kind of, oh, this is different and interesting, went away, has been quite challenging, right? And for a business that we work hard on our culture, but it was always kind of part of who we were. And so suddenly you have to step back and think about, well, what does that mean when you're not all together and it's not done through a mix of work hard, play hard. It's, you know, work hard and try and figure it out is difficult. You know, I think that's probably not unique to us, but it's certainly been something that we've had to adjust our ways of working and our ways of thinking about that to try and make it work better. But it's very difficult.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's great. It's a great point that a lot of companies have, you know, even said to me, well, yeah, we know how to work remotely in many ways, but that's not the only thing that's been going on. It's been the fact that you're stuck at home without any social life, perhaps with family crawling all over the, you know, over the room, trying to share a space with people who perhaps weren't there before. So yeah, there's a whole number of things where you say it changes the whole equation in people's minds.
Exactly.
Well, so how's you said you've been through this, you know, kind of challenging times, you know, a couple of times in the economy. Do you have some kind of like mental playbook about like how do you try to, you know, how do you think about this? You know, clearly customers are going to go through their own rocky times. There's a lot of the visibility is drastically reduced. Yeah, what kind of moves do you make in terms of how do you lead the business differently in those times? I mean, you've definitely talked about hitting the accelerator and saying, well, let's actually double down. But was there some kind of guidelines, guiding principles that you've figured out over the years to get through those times?
I wish so, yeah. And the book's coming soon. No, I think there's there's a real gut feel about this, right? I think that you have to place as a leader on the business that you exist in. You know, I was talking to an investor friend of mine as this thing kicked off, and you know, he was in the midst of trying to help an early stage company whose niche was over 65s with underlying health conditions. It was tourism for over 65s with underlying health conditions. I mean, that was that was not the time to be going out to try and do this, right? So, you know, luckily I'm not. Which is a great idea, but the timing's horrendous, right? So you've got to take a judgment call on what kind of business that you have, and also on how to make sure you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater as you go forward with these things. And, you know, and we've certainly been through the round of these things, but I wouldn't say I've been in the middle of of something like this where we weren't very early stage. You know, the business is a very different beast now. I have a baby and I have the bathwater, quite literally, in my life, but the metaphor works here as well. That means the risk quota is very, very different, right? And so if we get this wrong, there's a lot more that goes wrong in this particular time. And it's, you know, we don't necessarily have a big Titanic that needs to get turned, but there's certainly a lot more in the business that's harder to turn on or off quickly than there was when you were very, very small. And so that piece of the puzzle is a lot more complicated. You know, we're used to being very agile and able to turn corners quite quickly. You know, suddenly you get to 60 plus people and longer term commitments in different ways, and that battleship's just a little bit bigger and a little bit less agile than it was before. So, you know, I don't have that experience at this scale in this specific thing, and I'm not sure that anybody should think that they do, right? But I think that what we had to do very quickly was step back from this. We did adjust some of our numbers, right? We assumed that churn would be higher this year than it's been, and I think that, you know, I wanted to get out and speak to the market and see what people were expecting, and the market's expecting that, right? People are not deluded, and so, you know, we can make forecasts that allow for a bit more of that. And unfortunately, we do have customers that have not, will not come through this this chapter, most likely. And so, you know, you've got to take a realistic perspective that the world is not the same world that you went into, and forecasting, you know, 100+% growth and basically no attrition is just not realistic. You know, we continue to grow strongly and you know, do this acquisition, but we slowed down some of our other kind of headcount growth and other things, which, so we weren't 110% risk on anymore. We were probably more like 50 or 60% in our own context of what we do. But mostly for me, it's about, do I keep investing in the longer term strategy, or do I double down on what we're doing today, right? And that has been, I spent 3 months thinking about that and seeing what would happen, to come out the end of it with, I think we continue to invest in the longer term growth for us because it's been a good quarter, but equally I could have gone the other way, right? And I think making those quick decisions was most important.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, I mean, that's key. You say, how far ahead can I afford to think based on how well is my current engine doing, right? My current economic engine doing, and I think the other question you mentioned is the risk profile, and there's this question about how optimized are we as a business. Actually, it turns out that you don't want to be too optimized as a business, because things can break easier, right, when you're super optimized. So actually, in a way, having a bit of redundancy in the business, whilst it can feel inefficient in one level, actually in a situation of uncertainty, can actually help, right? It's like,
Exactly.
On a domestic sense, the minimalist, who's got like nothing in their home, is great when life is working, but when there's like no food in the shops, they have a problem. Where the guy that's kind of like got a basement full of pasta or whatever it is, totally inefficient in one sense, can weather storms differently. So it's kind of interesting when this kind of uncertainty throws up.
It is, and I think anyone that knows a high growth business that's come from this little idea to 60 odd people is very unlikely to have all of those things in place. I definitely don't have a basement full of food in any form of that metaphor, right? Like you're basically firefighting in the near term anyway. And even back to that long term planning, I think we've probably got a good idea of what 6 months looks like, probably 12. But in any real corporate setting, right, we're all working in a much narrower time frame, in a much more agile way. What I spent the last 6 months doing, which predates COVID, bore no resemblance to what I planned it to look like the 6 months before, because an acquisition opportunity came along that seismically changed the business overnight, right? And you're kind of that agile as an organization anyway when you're small, but I do think that kind of wartime, peacetime CEO kind of discussion comes out a little bit more then, and you kind of think about, well, what kind of business are we, and what kind of leader am I in this type of time? And what does my board behave like, right, as well? Because the board was very very much kind of looking at us to make those decisions, and weren't really sure like which way to carve. And I think that depending on your board, that could be a very difficult conversation. We were quite lucky.
And that question of leadership growth is super interesting. How has it forced you to grow as a leader? I mean, what do you think what's your story been over the last 6 months?
I mean, I think we're just winging it, right? Like I'd love to say it was more, but I do think that your days get even fuller, and your mind's busy with ideas and strategic plans, and trying to figure out whether you unpick what you've been working towards or not, plus dealing with the human side of everything that's going on. So I think my head is full of a lot of information. What I've been trying to do as a person is to kind of scale myself a little bit more and work more on the business rather than in the business, which has been tricky because we're missing a few kind of key headcount positions in the business. And so I'm dual. As always, you wear a lot of hats as a CEO of a growth business. I'm probably wearing too many at the moment, but working out how to get some of that off your own plate to give yourself half a chance of having some time to think is mission one. I'd say that I've not done a great job of that for the last 6 months. It's been so busy that it's been mostly reactive leadership and trying to find the time rather than the positive. I'm not sure that's a massive negative either, right? Like obviously I'd love to step back from it and say it could be different, but it's exactly what the business needed for me to do at that point in time, and it didn't need anything else.
And when crisis hits, right, often you need to kind of jump in and do that. I think, but that question about scaling yourself and being the bottleneck, I just see that all the time. I call it the leader's dilemma, because leaders get to where they are based on their ability to be amazing problem solvers, right? Normally, and you can pretty much solve anything that's put on your plate. But the issue is that that naturally means that problems come to you and you become the kind of chief problem solver. And so for me, the leader's dilemma is, do I solve the problem now and go fast? Or do I build the team and build momentum, right, in that moment? So, is this the part for me, so the temptation is always say, let me just get it done. It'll be faster. We solve the problem. It'll be a good answer and we can move forward. But that does tend to kind of keep us prisoner, right, to that
I think it's a really good observation, and it's certainly one that I deal with, right? The business has grown with you and around you, and so you haven't necessarily documented all of the things that you know and do, right? So it's really hard to hand that thing over to somebody else in any kind of structured way, because it lives around you and it lives inside you. The other bit is, I think that you get to this size as a business, we're 60-ish people, and the type of person that you need to hire is slightly different. I was reading a comment from someone recently that said, when you're below 100 people, you kind of hire well-rounded generalists who get the job done. Above 100, you hire someone who wants to hire 8 people around them to do the job that the person before would have done, and you've just got to accept that fact, right? And I think that that happens as you approach sort of 70 to 100 somewhere, I think, in reality, right? And you can't afford all those extra people, so you're still looking for generalists, but finding people that have got the experience to lead a business and a team that size, when you're looking for designers and developers and managers of those teams, is a lot harder, right? Like you're not finding kind of grafting, entrepreneurial, experienced leaders who are happy to get in and do all the dirty work, do all the hours and everything. It's not that people are lazy, it's just it's a different time of career. I think they still exist, but they're much fewer and further between. And so you end up stepping back in to kind of keep that thing moving because you don't have a choice, right? And it's a challenging point.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think as a kind of high energy founder, you often come with that ability to roll up my sleeves, get stuff done. Actually, the role starts to shift because you need to become the person that's actually mobilizing a management structure, and actually just say, how do I multiply what's inside me into them and into the broader culture, so that other people start to think in the way that I think this company needs to be thinking about things, and how do I bring the best out of them? And it's a very different skill set, right? And I like to say that most people are doing last year's job, and that includes founders and owners and CEOs and everything else, right? It's like the thing that we were doing last year that was really working for us last year, we think, well, that's the formula, right? I've got the success formula, and I'm always talking about, well, we need to kind of upgrade that formula for the challenges that are coming, and that's often where we're lagging, right? We kind of thinking, we're always one step in the past, often not in terms of what we're working on, but the way that we're working on it.
Exactly. And I think not leaving your business behind in some of that can be quite tricky as well. When you're living one foot in the present and one foot in the future as that kind of CEO, the balance between what you tell your teams now and what you don't, because there's variability in where the kind of future things might go, and they've got a busy day job already. Like, do you need to layer them with the extra stuff? Is a real balance as well. No one wants to live inside my head for too long, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I thought it's the difference between like driving performance and releasing commitment. There's kind of like a shift there, and the driving one kind of gets exhausting at some point, because the energy, the motivation, the commitment, and all the ideas are within you, and then it's a shift. But you're right. When you're kind of trying to navigate a ship through very immediate icebergs, or whatever it is, whatever the metaphor is, sometimes you just need to grab the wheel, right, for a bit of time. But then it's how do you come out of that?
Exactly. I think the most important thing for me is, though, it's still, it's a high energy thing. It's challenging and it's interesting, rather. The intellectual challenge of a business at this size, I think, works for some founders and doesn't work for others, right? For me, it's never been more interesting in some ways, right? Like, it's a different type of interest, but it's never been more interesting. And so that personal growth that keeps coming with the kind of the business growth that sits around it, with that constant niggle of fear and questioning and doubt in the back of your mind is probably mostly healthy, right? And keeps you going. That's the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no growth in the comfort zone, right? You want to be thinking and addressing and driving. So,
well, maybe there is. I'm my own worst enemy, probably. I just keep adding more in. But let's see.
Well, yes, that's. I have a friend of mine who has a snail on his desk to remind him to slow down, to speed up. Right, that actually the breakthroughs come when we actually take. I like to say, one of my phrases is, you can't change gear when you've got your foot jammed on the accelerator.
Exactly.
And that's hard. That's hard, because I love jamming my foot on the accelerator. It's exciting, right? But then at some point, there's nothing else there.
I think if you're used to real high pace, as kind of kind of parting thought is, you can think you're going slower, but in reality, you're still going at 1,000 miles an hour. Right? I kind of use the analogy of when I was learning to play golf. Right, I kind of remember the instructor telling me to slow down my swing, and I'm like, I don't go any slower. And you watch it back on video, and you're like, Jesus, I was swinging that thing like it was a baseball bat, right? And so, in your mind, you think you're going slow, but in reality, you're still whipping that club around as though everything's going everywhere all over the time. And that ability to sort of step back and to actually find a bit more slow, especially in this scenario, right? Like, there is no slow right now. It's just 150 miles an hour nonstop.
Yes. Great. Well, hey, just a few quick fire questions as we wrap up. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite book, or a book that really inspired you?
Good question, and put me on the spot with one of those. I mean, I read a lot of business books, but I'm a sports person, and so for me, I find a lot of interest in the psychology of leading sports teams. I'm a Manchester United fan, so I'd probably say something like the Sir Alex Ferguson book on leadership for me is really interesting, right? As we rebuild a team for the second or third time as part of growth, I've sort of revisited that book and thought, well, how did someone like that in the sports environment do that and keep those high performing teams going over and over again? So I've got loads, but that's it's a personal fave because it crosses the life between business and pleasure as well.
Yeah, which is great. What about a productivity tip? We were talking about running at 150 miles an hour. So what's one thing that you do that you think is a secret of success, right, in terms of getting things done?
So I'm like an inherently unstructured person. I think accepting that is one of the most important things. Actually, during COVID, I decided to get myself a virtual PA. And I think it might be the best decision I've ever made. So, like, someone behind the scenes that sweeps up all the unstructure and turns it into structure and helps me to really balance my time and just gets the things done that I was never, I used to do them at 10 o'clock at night or weekends. And it's not that I still don't end up working at those hours, but I'm spending it doing different things now. So I'd say that was one, right? There's some really good structures out there that mean you don't need, you don't need to go and find that person. I don't think it's a full-time role, but having someone behind me to help keep me a bit sane and managed has been really good. And obviously, having a great solution for where to kind of manage your ideas is always right up there as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what about an inspiring leader or heroic figure, that kind of excites you or inspires you in some dimension?
So look, the business that I admire a lot, right? And I'm not big up on idols or anything like that, but I really like the business that Benioff built at Salesforce, right? I'm not saying that I don't know the guy, I don't know anything, but I like the way that they took that thing and that they built a sector. It kind of existed before, but they really redefined it, and they've really defined the way that business is done in a very different way than many other people do. And I would say that in the way that we're trying to grow our business is very much along the lines of how Salesforce built itself and built its market around it from the ground up. So yeah, probably that would be one good example.
Yeah, no, great, nice one. And what about last one? A favorite quote or motto? Do you have a kind of a phrase that you bandy around in the company?
So there's a quote that sits on the foot of one of my clients' emails that I like quite a lot, which is that minds are like parachutes, and they only work best when they're open. And so I quite like that one. I think there's a few that we kind of live around inspirational quotes because we're in the innovation world, and a lot of them are a bit cliche. But I quite like that when it pops up on my email. There's again, I'm not mega up on these things really, but I quite like that one that sort of pops up when I see the client's email come through.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think the other one I like around, just on that one about open minds, is somebody said, there's no point having an open mind unless you close it again on something, which I thought was kind of interesting twist on it, right? Because there is that phase, right? In the innovation cycle, there's a phase of like being open, right? And like gathering all the possibilities. And
exactly.
then there is that kind of focusing and implementation, and okay, this is where we're going, and let's move forward on it. So
the other side of that, there's a quote that sits on a lot of our sales decks, partly of the way that we work, right? We try and get businesses to do exactly that, focus on the problems that you're trying to solve, and then ideate and innovate around those rather than just doing it blanket, which is how people want to do. And so the kind of Albert Einstein quote, which is, if you gave me an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes working on the problem and 5 minutes solving it, or however it goes, right?
Yeah.
Basically, the sentiment being exactly that, right? Let's spend as much time as we can thinking about that problem, and then the answers are quite easy actually.
Exactly. Yeah. Defining the problem is often the hardest thing, right? And
exactly.
And once you define it, then actually the answers that you said probably come quite naturally once you've actually figured out what the actual issue is. Well, exactly. Hey, it's been really great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Where can people find out more about you or about Wazoku? I never say it right. It's terrible. Wazoku.
It doesn't matter. Wazoku. You search something that sounds like it, you'll find us. Okay. So yeah, you can find me in all the usual places, and I'm never short of a soapbox moment on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me on there. And obviously the corporate website wazoku.com is a place that people can dig into. Business we just acquired is a company called innocentive.com. People interested in innovation challenges should go there, and you can sign up, and there's opportunities to get paid for your great ideas through that domain as well. We've awarded up to $1 million to people for brilliant ideas through that particular platform. So go check it out. And thanks, Richard, for a good conversation.
No, thanks, Simon. Well, I I think what you're doing is fantastic, and because innovation, right? It's especially for companies in Europe, in the US. Not going to always have the lowest cost base possible based on pure hours or whatever it is, right, that we're contributing, but innovation is where value is created. So anyone who's helping structure the world's ideas and bubble up the things that are going to make the impact for the next month or years ahead is always exciting and motivating. So thank you for opening the door a bit on that today.
My pleasure, and I'll speak to you again soon. Thanks,
Simon. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's turn to you. If you're a top performer who's already accomplished great things and yet knows that there's a whole new level of impact and potential open to you, then why don't we get on the phone and strategize on how to get you there? Head over to xquadrant.com/speak to find out more. Until next time, be bold and be purposeful.